is only one perfect solution, but there are clues that will try to trick our team.
Hello there, everyone. My name is Crazy Caleb, and welcome to Point Grid. This is the way the module looks. What we have here is we have a series of arrows surrounding the outer bits of the module here, and on the module we have a 6x6 grid of numbers and a green submit button in the center of the 6x6 grid. So, what we're going to be trying to do is we're going to be trying to figure out not what these numbers are going to be, but rather what these arrows are going to be pointing to. And we need to determine their directions by rotating them 45 degrees each time and figuring out which way works for us. So, looking at our grid here, what do these numbers exactly mean? Well, what these numbers mean is the amount of arrows that are pointing to it, and what happens is that the arrows are going to go through each individual arrow until they reach the edge of the grid, or until they reach the outside somewhere. It does not loop around. So for example, say if we were pointing this arrow right here, if it was to point up left, it would be visiting the 2, and then it would go out to the grid and not continue around to out here, to down at delta 6. That's not the way that this works. What it would do is instead just stop. That's the way that it works. So, in order to solve this module, what exactly do we need to do? We're going to click the green button in the middle once the arrows have been set to the correct orientation, and when we know that they've been set to the correct orientation, this means that all of the arrows must be pointing towards at least one cell in the number grid. So in this case, we can't have something pointing outside, and that just isn't going to work. So already that eliminates like half of the options for the arrow. And the numbers in each cell must represent how many arrows are pointing to that cell. So as I mentioned beforehand, and it gives you an example of grid to actually figure out how it works. But essentially, what you do is with the arrow, the way that the arrow works is it travels through every single thing that it comes along here. So say we take this arrow, for example, it's going to continue traveling down right until it reaches the end of the grid. So in this case, this is what it's going to do. So if we move down, it's going to hit all 6 of these in a row, in the column rather. If it moves left, it's going to hit all of that in the same row, and so on and so forth. So essentially, we're going to use these numbers here, and we're going to determine which way our arrows are going to go. Now, the best cases for clues here is going to be the 3s and the 0s, because what this essentially means here is that there's going to be either no arrows pointing towards that direction, or there's going to be arrows that are going to be pointing all that direction. So that's going to be what you're going to start with. So we can already determine here from our first column here, we know for a fact that it cannot be pointing down. And the only other option available is for it to be pointing down to the right, because of the fact that that's the only other option that actually hits a number. If it goes down left, it doesn't work. If it goes to the right, it hits arrows but not numbers. So that's going to be guaranteed right there because of all of these zeros. We need to make sure that there are no arrows pointing at these directions. So same thing we can do here with this Bravo column here. We know for a fact that it's going to be pointing down simply because of the fact that there's a 3, which is going to be very, very useful, and also because of the fact that the other 2 directions that it could possibly go in are zeros, which in this case is bottom left or bottom right. That's just work. Now, let's take a look at our next solution here. So the next one, we have a C column. So we have the Z column here, and as we can see, what we can do here is we could go to the bottom left for 3, but if we do, it's going to continue down to the 0. So we know for a fact that it's not going to be the bottom left. So that's not going to be true. Now, the only other option for this one is going to be the bottom right. So we're going to be pointing that there. And now, one other thing that we can do is now that we've determined that this is a 3 here, for example, we know that for a fact that this is a 3, there's only a maximum of 4 arrows that could potentially be pointing to it. Or actually, excuse me, 5 rather, depending on where you're at. So now what we can do with this 3 here is we can take a look at the 2 other options that can point to it. In this case, that's going to be this arrow on the same row, or down in the bottom right here if it was going to be pointing up left. So now what we can do here is we can determine that this left arrow is not going to be pointing left simply because of the fact that there is a 0 here. That's just not going to work. So we know for a fact that this is going to be pointing up left because of this 3 here, and that's the only way that we can have 3 arrows pointing at it safely without having any problems. So that's going to be good to go. And already we've determined a lot of the arrows that we already need to have, but we need to obviously continue on. So let's figure this out. So we know that these are the 3 directions for these arrows. Let's take a look at this next one. We know for a fact that this cannot be a down pointing arrow, and this can't be a down left arrow. The down left arrow being because it's a 0. And also it can't be down because of the fact that we've got this down right arrow pointing at these 1s here. So what we need to do is we now need to go to the bottom right for this one. That's just the way that's going to work. And now taking a look here, this is pointing down right. So we know for a fact that we cannot go down with this arrow. So therefore, this forces us to go down to the right here because we're already covering this one square at delta 1 already. So we are going to be going down right. Now for this one, we could potentially use down here. This would work, and it would actually cover the two that we need to cover it, because we know for a fact that we're not going to be pointing left at row 1 here. So this would work perfectly fine. And let's take a look. Let's make sure that everything's covered here. It could potentially be something like this, where these two are covered by themselves, but for now, I'm going to hold that off. But it is a bit concerning that we have a couple spaces that aren't covered twice yet. And I am a little bit worried if we think about this a little bit ahead of time. So these two, we have Echo 1 and Foxtrot 2 that need to be covered twice. If we were to do it like this would already cause problems for us because the two options in this Foxtrot column, being down and down left, would already be covered twice, and that is not going to work for us. So we know for a fact that it's either going to have to be down or down left, but we know for a fact that this is not going to be pointing up left. It's not going to be that way. So, and another thing that we need to consider is we need to consider the fact that this is not going to be pointing top left or left itself, because of the fact that we've determined that. So we know for a fact that this is going to be pointing bottom left. So likely what this means is that this is going to be pointing bottom left in order to get the two spaces covered here, and in order to not have three spaces being pointed at Foxtrot 2. So that's the way that works. So now we know for a fact that this cannot be pointing left. We need to cover this 2 up into Foxtrot 1, so therefore that forces it to point there for the second row. We know it cannot be pointing left here, and we know we can't point up left because of this problem with these two 2s, so therefore it forces it down into the bottom left. Can't be pointing left. It can't be pointing up left, so therefore it forces it to be bottom right, and that makes sense because we have 3 here that we need to worry about. We cannot point left. So therefore, we need to be pointing somewhere else. It can't be up left because we run into a 0. So therefore, it forces it to be bottom left. And just like that, we've determined all of our arrow grids, and it makes sense because of the fact that we hit this position 3 times. Hopefully, you guys are able to follow along with how I did this. Remember, using the 0s and 3s is going to be helpful a lot. And let's now hit our green submit button. And it will run through all of the arrows, checking the greens. Now, if you happen to submit anything incorrectly,
I would
it
love
will
to give you that,
immediately
but
let
I
you know
really
if you
can't.
strike or not. So that's going to be important to know. So let's take a look at our next example here, and let's continue on. So we know for a fact that the first column cannot be pointing bottom right because it's going to run into the 0 here. So we know for a fact that we're going to have to point this thing down. That's perfect. So next up, we know for a fact that we're not going to be pointing this guy down. Oh my gosh, we've got a 5 here. I did not expect that we get a 5 here, but in this case, what this essentially means is that every possible direction that we can get to this is going to be pointing at it. So we know for a fact that this is going to be pointing at it, so bottom right here. This is going to be pointing at it straight down. This is going to be pointing at it bottom left. This is going to be pointing at it just straight to the left here. And this is going to be pointing at it straight to the top, the bottom right up top left here. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 arrows are pointing at it. So therefore, that is going to be our 5 taken care of. Those are really, really nice clues because we already determined so many of them. Same thing with this 4. We can actually determine this 4, I believe, already too. Not necessarily, not quite yet, because of the fact that there are still 5 options here. There's D, E, and F, and then row 1 and 3 that we can potentially determine here. So let's take a look around and let's see what we can do to deduce any sort of clues that were given to us. And there really isn't much that we can actually do quite yet. I think it's better to just focus on continuing on. And let's see what else we can potentially do. Well, another thing that we've already determined is this bottom row here. We know for a fact that we're not going to be going up left because of the fact that there's a 0 there, so therefore this is forced as well. Same thing with the first row, as first column here. So let's continue on. I'd like to believe that this is pointing left, just because of the fact that there are a lot of 3s here. So that is definitely something that's interesting to note. We know for a fact that this one's pointing down. We know this is pointing bottom right. It cannot be pointing down. This cannot be pointing down because of the fact that there's a 0 here. So therefore, that forces it to be either bottom left or bottom right. And I'd like to believe bottom left a bit more, but I don't quite know yet. We'll keep our eyes on this one. I'm going to leave this one down for the time being. Just remember that we have the 0 here. Let's take a look around here. Let's see if we can figure out any other clues for us. I do believe that this is left. I think that this one is definitely safe to say that it is left. So, I guess another thing that we can do is we can figure out that, hey, because of the fact that this 2 needs to be covered at some point and it can't be covered by the 3rd row, we know for a fact that this is going to be pointing down. That's the only way that we can cover this. So that is good to go. So down happens to be is going to happen here. That much is certain. Now the other thing that I'm a bit concerned about is these 3s, for example. Which is why I'm a little bit more inclined to believe that it is bottom right here. And this being left would cover everything else that we need to cover. I think that that would make sense. Now, as for rows and how they go, this up left would make sense, but we need to make sure that it's covered 4 times. Yes, it is, because 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? The 2 is hit twice, the 3 is hit, yes, it's hit 3 times, and I think we actually have everything set up. These 2 are 2s, that is a 2 hit right there. I think that this should be good. Yep. Very good. And just like that, there is a solved module. So it's a fairly simple module. Just make sure that you understand that the rules for the arrows are they continue going on through the entire grid until you hit the outer bit of the grid, in which case they stop. So, as always, thank you guys for watching. Remember to stay crazy, stay cool, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.